He thought I was asleep. That's how sure of himself he'd become. I watched through my half-closed eyes as my son Graham crouched by the fireplace, holding the folder I kept in the locked drawer of my old writing desk. He had found the key, of course. Maybe he always knew where I kept it. I saw him pull out the papers, flip through them with that same impatient motion I remembered from his school days, and then, without hesitation, he fed the will into the flames. One by one, the pages curled, blackened, vanished. He stood there a moment longer, staring into the fire like a man watching debts disappear. And then, as if nothing had happened, he put the folder back, closed the drawer, and turned off the lamp. I heard his steps fade down the hallway, the creak of his bedroom door, and then silence. I didn't move. Not out of fear, not anymore. I'd stopped being afraid of Graham a long time ago. No, I stayed still because I needed the moment to settle inside me like sediment in water. I needed to remember this, every detail. How quiet it was. How calm he looked. How it finally happened. Not with a fight, not with yelling, but with a fire and a smirk. He truly believed that was the only copy. I lay in the dark for hours, listening to the old house breathe, thinking of the boy I raised, the boy who used to cry when his shoelaces got tangled, the boy who brought me dandelions with muddy hands. Somewhere along the way, that boy died. And what replaced him? Well, that creature was my doing too, wasn't it? People like to say, you did your best. But what if your best was still not enough? I hadn't cried in years, not when the doctor told me Harold had 2 months left, not at the funeral, not even when Graham asked me to sell the house because his investment opportunity couldn't wait. But that night, I let 2 tears slide into my pillow, not for the will, not for the money, but for the finality of it, for the confirmation that my son saw me not as a mother, but as a lockbox. And tonight, he'd decided to crack it open. The funny thing is, it wasn't even the current version. I changed the will 7 months ago. Back then, after the last time he screamed at me for interfering when I asked about his drinking, I called my lawyer. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just asked Miss Howland to prepare a new version, and in that version, Graham Rowan was removed entirely. He didn't know that, of course. He burned the old one, the one I left in the drawer for him to find. Let him think he'd won. Let him enjoy the illusion. That night, lying there in the dark, I realized something else. I'd never get an apology. Graham wouldn't wake up tomorrow and regret what he'd done. He'd wake up with plans. To redecorate. To sell the land. To take a trip with that sharp-eyed woman he never introduced properly. He thought everything was his now. The truth would break him. But not yet. I needed time. Not much. Just enough to put the rest of it in order. I'd already moved my accounts. Closed the shared ones. Retitled the cabin in my granddaughter's name. But there were still things to say, letters to write, and a few conversations I couldn't leave unsaid. The clock ticked past 3 in the morning when I finally sat up, pulled on my robe, and shuffled to the kitchen. The house was cold. He'd turned down the heat again. Saving money, he said, as if it was his to save. I put on the kettle and stared at the small window above the sink. Outside, the garden lay silent under the autumn moon. The same garden where Graham took his first steps, where I buried our dog in a shoebox, where Harold planted tulips every spring until his hands gave out. Nothing about this house had changed, and yet everything had. When the tea was ready, I sat at the table and pulled a pen from the drawer. There was an envelope already addressed to Miss Howland. I had meant to send it next week, but I would send it today. No more waiting. No more trusting time to fix what love couldn't. I wrote just one sentence. Please proceed with the distribution as per the final copy. And then I added a postscript. He's already burned what he thinks is the only will. Let him sit in the ashes a while. The paper trembled slightly as I folded it, not from fear, but from a quiet, rising strength I hadn't felt in years. Let him think he won. Let him live in that comfort for now, because the truth has its own clock, and it always rings right on time. The first time he asked me for money, it was for guitar lessons. He was 12. Harold had just been diagnosed, and we were trying not to let the weight of it sit too heavy on the house. Graham came into the kitchen, shoulders hunched, eyes darting the way they did when he wanted something he wasn't sure he deserved. He said, "It's only $50 a month. I'll do dishes, I promise." I said yes before he finished. That's what mothers do. We say yes, and we figure it out later. He quit lessons 2 weeks in, said the teacher smelled weird. It was the beginning of a pattern I didn't recognize until years later. How quickly he'd fall in love with something, then discard it. A new interest, a new woman, a new job, a new truth, and always, it was my job to catch the pieces when it fell apart. After Harold died, the requests grew bigger. Not instantly. He waited, like a vulture who knows the flesh is still warm. "Mom, it's just a used car. Mom, I need first and last month's rent, just to get started. Mom, can I put something in your name, just for a little while?" I said yes, yes, yes. I said it even when my bank account said no. I said it because I was scared of what would happen if I didn't. I sold the house 3 years after Harold passed. The market was good, Graham said. It was dead weight, anyway. I remember the way he said it, casually, like the home that held every memory of our family was just furniture to be moved. We moved in together. Or rather, I moved into the back guest room of the house he bought with my money. He called it ours until the paperwork came. Then it was his. I didn't argue. You don't argue when you've made yourself disposable, but I kept the deed to the cabin. The old place near Mill Creek, half-rotten porch, mice in the attic, paint peeling like dry skin. Graham hated it. "What do you want with that dump?" he asked once. "You can't even get Wi-Fi up there." Exactly, I thought. But I didn't say it. What I did say was, "It's all I want when I go. Just bury me near the oak and leave the rest to you." He smiled, smug and sure. That was the day I wrote the first version of the will. His name was all over it. I even added a note about the cafe he wanted to open, said I hoped the money would help build his dream. He never opened it. Instead, he invested in some friend's franchise and lost half within a year. That was when the drinking started. Quiet at first, then loud, then angry. By then, I'd stopped asking where the money went. Stopped asking about the bruises on his knuckles. Stopped asking why I hadn't seen his girlfriend in months. It was easier not to know. But the day he yelled, truly yelled, was the day I began to wake up. He came home late, slammed the front door so hard the picture of Harold tilted on the wall. I asked if he'd eaten. Just that. A small, tired question. And he turned on me like a stranger. "What does it matter?" he spat. "You always ask. You don't care. You just want to keep tabs. Control everything. You think this is still your house?" I didn't answer. I went to my room, locked the door. I cried that night, quietly, into the pillow. I thought it was sadness. Now I know it was something else. Humiliation. And once that seed is planted, it never stops growing. 2 days later, I called Miss Howland. She was surprised to hear from me. "It hasn't even been 2 years since the last draft," she said. "I know," I told her. "But I've changed my mind." She didn't ask why. Lawyers like her don't. She just asked for the details and set up the appointment. I took a taxi to her office. Graham never knew. He was gone all day, most days, chasing leads that never turned into jobs. It was a bright, cold morning. The kind that cuts your skin but clears your thoughts. I remember the click of her pen, the quiet hum of the printer, the smell of legal paper. We rewrote everything. The house, sold, and already in his name, was untouchable. But the rest? My investments. The account from Harold's pension. The insurance payout I never touched. The emergency fund. The safety deposit box. All of it was placed in trust. And Graham's name was erased. "I want the bulk of it to go to my granddaughter," I said. "Bella Rowan?" "Yes. She doesn't know yet, but she's the only one who visits without needing something." Miss Howland nodded. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure about this," I said. She printed 2 copies, one for her files. One I took home, and then, foolishly, I printed one more, the version Graham would find someday. The decoy. The illusion. Because I still hoped. Still hoped that maybe, given enough rope, he wouldn't hang himself. That hope burned up with the papers in the fireplace last night. Good. Let it burn. I'm done hoping. Now I'm just preparing. When I was young, I thought legal documents were for people in suits. Men in offices, women with briefcases, people who said words like executor and liquid assets without blinking. I never imagined I'd be sitting across from a lawyer, erasing my own son from the future I once promised him. But Miss Howland never made me feel small. She was quiet, efficient, sharp as a pin, but never unkind. When I told her I wanted a new will, she didn't blink. When I gave her the numbers, she didn't flinch. And when I said, "He won't take this well," she just nodded and said, "That's why we keep everything here." The final copy, the only copy that matters, lives in her locked cabinet. Signed, witnessed, notarized. No coffee-stained pages in the desk. No folders in the hall closet. No easy mistakes. Still, part of me wanted Graham to find something, to give him just enough rope to feel secure. That's why I left the outdated draft in my drawer, the one with his name on every line, his tone in every margin. "Mom, just put it all in my name for now. We'll fix the details later." I let him think he found it. Let him think the fire finished the matter. But paper burns. Legality does not. Let him feel the smugness of false victory. Let him gloat in silence. The reckoning would come, not loud, not public, but clean and complete. That morning, after sealing the envelope to Miss Howland, I made oatmeal and ate alone. He didn't come out of his room until nearly noon. No good morning, no mention of the drawer, the papers, the ashes in the fireplace. Just a grunted, "You use the car today?" I said no. He took the keys and left without another word. And I sat there, hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug, thinking about how easy the lie came to him. No twitch in the eye, no shift in the voice. He could have been anyone. A landlord, a stranger, certainly not the boy I once walked to kindergarten. I spent the afternoon cleaning. Not out of duty, I'm long past caring what he thinks of the dust on my baseboards, but because motion helps thinking. I polished the old lamp in the hallway, swept under the armchair, And then I opened the cedar box where Harold used to keep his army medals and slipped in the decoy will, the last fragment of pretense. Let that box sit closed. Let the lies sit next to the truth, sealed in wood and time. By evening, the house was quiet again, the kind of quiet that hums in your ears. Graham didn't come back for dinner. I wasn't surprised. He's been avoiding shared meals lately. Too many silences to fill. Too many questions he knows I've stopped asking. I went to bed early, but didn't sleep. Instead, I listened. To the pipes ticking, to the wind clawing the gutters, to the sound of my own breath. And I thought of Bella. 17. Long legs, sharp mind. Too many books in her bag. She comes by once a week, never with her hand out, just to sit, to talk. She still calls me grandma, not ma'am, like Graham once suggested, said it sounded more neutral. I made her guardian of the trust. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. Enough to choose her own future. Enough to go to college without debt. Enough to know someone believed in her. Graham will hate it. He'll call it manipulation, betrayal, spite. But it's not. It's justice. Quiet, boring, paperwork justice. He took and took and took, and now the pipeline is dry. I'm done financing his tantrums. The house he already owns. Legally. I signed it over 2 years ago when I thought it would keep the peace. That was my last mistake. Everything else, the accounts, the bonds, the emergency fund, is mine. Still mine. Until I'm gone. And when that day comes, he'll learn what ashes are really worth. He started checking my mail. Not openly. Graham's never been that obvious. But I noticed the signs. Envelopes half torn and tucked back in crooked. Statements that used to arrive on the 3rd now coming late. Opened. Resealed. I didn't say anything at first. I wanted to see how far he'd go. Then one morning, he knocked on my door holding a glossy brochure. "Mom, this came from your bank," he said, too casually. "You know you're still getting offers for credit cards? It's risky at your age." At my age. I took the paper, glanced at it, then laid it down without a word. He hovered in the doorway like he was waiting for permission to continue. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "maybe we should simplify things, consolidate your accounts, maybe even make me co-signer, just in case, something happens." I looked at him. Really looked. His face was still mine in places. The slope of the nose, the curve of the chin. But the eyes were wrong. Harold's eyes had been kind. Graham's were always calculating. "Something already happened," I said, and stood up to get more tea. That afternoon I went to the bank. I didn't call a cab. Didn't ask permission. I took my handbag, walked 2 blocks to the bus stop, and climbed aboard like any other quiet woman with a purpose. No one looked at me twice. I liked that. At the counter, the manager, a young man with a trimmed beard and too much cologne, asked for ID. I showed it. When he saw the amounts in my accounts, his tone changed. "Is there a problem today, Mrs. Rowan?" "No," I said. "There was, but I'm fixing it." We spent the next hour going over everything. I revoked the power of Attorney Graham had pressured me to sign last winter. The one he said was just a formality. I moved the remaining balances into new individual accounts. I closed the joint one he'd been slowly draining with household expenses I never saw. I left the bank lighter. Not in money, in breath, in spine. When I got home, Graham was in the living room, feet on the coffee table, sipping from one of those tall cans he hides behind paper bags. "Where have you been?" he asked, eyes still on the television. I hung up my coat. "Walking." "Walking where?" Does it matter? He turned, annoyed. Of course it matters. You don't just disappear, Mom. What if something happened? I looked at him the way I used to when he came home after curfew smelling of beer and excuses. If something happens to me, I said, you'll be the first to know, but only the second to be surprised. He didn't like that. He stood, too quickly, knocking over the remote. What the hell does that mean? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Some truths are best left hanging in the air, sharp and silent. That night, he stayed out. He left angry, didn't say where he was going, slammed the door hard enough to rattle the glass in the front window. I didn't wait up. I locked the door behind him and slid the chain into place. Just after midnight, the phone rang. An unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me lift the receiver. Mrs. Rowan? A woman's voice asked. This is Linda from Fairview Security. We had an incident tonight. Your son was here. My chest tightened. Where? He was trying to get access to a safety deposit box, claimed to be you but didn't have the key or proper identification. He left when our staff called it in. I exhaled slowly. The air tasted of metal. Thank you for calling, I said. And thank you for not opening anything. The woman paused. He seemed confused, agitated. He's just looking for something he lost, I replied. After I hung up, I walked to my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the key. Still there. Still cold. Still mine. Let him panic. Let him dig. Let him open every drawer in the house, every memory, every shadow. He won't find what he's looking for, because I stopped hiding things in this house long ago. The last time I rewrote the will, I brought muffins. It sounds silly, I know. But Miss Howland always looked tired by afternoon, and something about bringing a small offering made me feel less like a burden, less like someone asking for trouble. I walked into her office with a paper bag of banana walnut and said, Today, I'd like to make things permanent. She smiled, a tired one, but real. It's already legal, Mrs. Rowan. I know, I said, but it's not done until it's final. Irrevocable. She looked at me over her glasses. That's a serious step. So was raising a child who turned into a stranger. She didn't press further. That's what I liked about her. We went through the documents again. The trust for Bella, now sealed with backup trustees. The medical directives. The restricted transfer clauses. I wanted it tight. No loopholes. No chance of contesting. When we were done, I signed slowly, each stroke steady, even when my fingers ached. You know, Miss Howland said, most people your age avoid cutting off their children completely. They leave just enough to keep the peace. I folded the pen and looked her in the eye. I lived in pieces long enough. Peace isn't the same as silence. She nodded, not as a lawyer this time, but as a woman. I handed her one last envelope. A letter I wrote the night before. It wasn't dramatic. I'm not a dramatic person. It simply said, if Graham Rowan ever contests any of this, this letter serves as my full explanation. He broke what couldn't be fixed, and I chose the only person left who still treats me like a human being. She filed it without comment. Outside, the sky was pale and brittle. I remember thinking it looked like old porcelain. That was 2 months ago. Since then, things have gone quiet between me and Graham. Not civil, not warm, just quiet, like two tenants who know they'll never renew the lease. He senses something's shifted. He doesn't ask where I go. He doesn't mention the will. But he's watching me. I can feel it. The way he pauses when I get the mail. The way he listens from the hallway when I speak to Bella on the phone. He's waiting for me to die, if we're being honest. That's the gamble he made when he lit the papers on fire. But I'm not dying. Not yet. I still have things to do. Not legal things, soul things. Things I should have done years ago, like tell Bella the truth. Not all at once, but piece by piece, like an inheritance in words. Because when the time comes, I don't want her to remember me only as the woman who left her money. I want her to remember I saw her, that I chose her. The lawyer has the documents. The bank has the orders. The hospice line has my preferences in writing. And Graham has nothing. Not because I hate him, I don't. Not because I want revenge, I'm too tired for that. But because I finally understand, you can love someone deeply and still not trust them with your dignity. That's a line you draw once in a lifetime. And once drawn, it saves you. Bella never knocked. She let herself in with the quiet confidence of someone who'd grown up here, even though she hadn't. Graham moved away before she was born, and by the time Bella was old enough to remember things, I was already living in the back guest room of his house. But somehow, she always knew this was my place. Not just the building, me, my kitchen, my table, my attention. She came every Thursday afternoon after school, still in her uniform, earbuds dangling around her neck like loose pearls. 17, but already carrying herself like someone older. Not jaded, just aware. That Thursday, she walked in as I was peeling potatoes and said, "Grandma, you're out of cinnamon." "I'm not baking anything," I said, glancing at her over my glasses. "You always say that," she grinned. "And then by the time I leave, the oven's warm and the house smells like October." She kissed my cheek and dropped her backpack by the table. The potatoes could wait. We sat, tea between us, her hands wrapped around the chipped blue mug I'd used since Harold died. She looked tired. Not in the way kids look tired from school, but the deeper kind. The kind you don't tell your parents about because you're not sure they'd understand. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded too fast. "College pressure?" I guessed. She hesitated, then shrugged. "Dad said there's no budget for dorms. I could live at home." I said nothing. "Or," she added quickly, "maybe defer a year. Work. Save up." I stirred my tea. He'd been promising her college since she was 10, talked about scholarships, starting strong, even opened a small savings account in her name, which, last I heard, he emptied when he got behind on his car loan. She didn't complain, not once. That's what made it worse. "You'll go," I said. She looked up. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." "I don't want to ask for anything." "You don't have to." We let that sit. She didn't know about the trust. Not yet. I wasn't ready to tell her, but I wanted her to feel it. Not the money, but the solidity of being chosen, of being trusted, of being loved not for what she gave, but for who she was. After a while, she stood and walked to the bookshelf, picked up the photo of Harold in uniform. "He looks like Dad," she said softly. "He does," I replied. "But Harold never raised his voice to me. Not once." She didn't ask what I meant. She already knew. Children always know, even when we think we're hiding things from them. They see the tension in our shoulders, the pauses in our stories. "Do you miss him?" she asked. "Every day," I said. "Even the days I don't think about him. He's still here, in the quiet." Bella nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the frame. Then she turned, suddenly serious. "Grandma, can I ask something?" "Always." "Why don't you move?" "To where?" I don't know. Somewhere nicer. Somewhere that's yours. This place feels like a waiting room, like you're stuck. I smiled at that. Sharp, observant girl. I'm not stuck, I said. I'm finishing something, then I'll go. Go where? Where no one can find me unless I want them to. She laughed, a soft, surprised sound. Do you think it's too late to start over? I asked her. She tilted her head. For you? I nodded. She considered that, then shook her head. No, not even close. I wanted to hug her, but I didn't. Instead, I handed her a slice of the banana bread I said I wasn't baking. She took a bite, smiled, and said, "Tastes like October." And in that moment, with the light fading and the kettle still warm and her legs folded under her like a little girl again, I remembered what it was like to be seen without being used. Bella didn't come for anything. She came for me, and I would not let that go unanswered. He called it a business dinner. I came home from the grocery store with a bag of apples and found strangers in my living room. 3 men in suits, 1 woman with a tablet, all talking loudly, wine already open on the counter. Graham was at the center of it, sleeves rolled up, grinning like a man who owned the place. "Oh, Mom," he said, as if I'd walked into someone else's house. "We're just having a little meeting. Big opportunity." I set the apples down slowly. "In my kitchen." "It's our kitchen," he corrected automatically. "Make yourself scarce for a couple of hours, okay?" The woman with the tablet looked at me politely, but without warmth. One of the men glanced around as if wondering why the help was still standing there. I felt the heat rise in my neck. "Where am I supposed to go?" Graham poured himself another glass. "Take a walk. Go see a friend. You like that coffee shop on Maple? Come back later." I looked at the clock. Nearly 7. The sky outside already turning the color of bruises. "I'm not dressed for—" I began, but he cut me off. "Please, Mom, just do this for me. It's important." I didn't say another word. I picked up my purse and coat and walked out the door without looking back. I heard him laugh behind me at something one of the men said. Not a laugh I recognized. I walked 3 blocks to the park, sat on a cold bench under a dying tree, and waited. Watched a woman push a stroller. Watched a dog chase its tail. Watched the light fade from the sky. I didn't cry. I just sat, hands folded on my lap, and thought, he doesn't even hear himself anymore. An hour later, I walked back. The cars were gone. The house smelled like wine and takeout. Graham was in the kitchen wiping the counter. "See?" he said brightly. "All done." I hung up my coat and went to my room without answering. He followed me. "Don't be like that," he said. "It was just business." I sat on the edge of the bed, untying my shoes. "Did you even ask me?" He sighed, exasperated. "Mom, it's my house." "No," I said quietly. "It was my house, and I gave it to you. That's not the same thing." He shifted his weight, eyes narrowing. "Why are you being so dramatic? I'm trying to build something here." I looked up at him. "On whose back?" He flinched at that, but only for a second. "You've got a roof over your head, don't you? Food? I'm not charging you rent. Maybe you should be grateful." That word, grateful, landed like a slap. I stood slowly, walked to my desk, opened the top drawer. Inside was an envelope. The decoy Will he thought he'd destroyed, now just ashes in his memory. Below it, another envelope, heavier, sealed. His eyes followed my hands. "What's that?" he asked. "Nothing you'd recognize," I said, closing the drawer again. He snorted. "You keep acting like you've got secrets. You don't. Everything here is mine. I turned and looked at him. Really looked. The man in front of me wasn't the boy who once begged for guitar lessons. He wasn't even the young man who tried to start a cafe. He was someone else entirely. A man convinced that taking was the same as owning. "You're right about one thing," I said quietly. "Everything here is yours. That's why I keep what matters somewhere else." He stared at me, confused, maybe a little unsettled. Then he forced a laugh. "You sound like you're in some movie," he said. "You've been watching too much TV." He walked out, muttering under his breath. The front door slammed a few minutes later. I opened the drawer again, took out the sealed envelope, and placed it into the small, fireproof box under my bed. Inside were the documents that still had my name on them: bank accounts, insurance, the title to the cabin, the final will, everything he hadn't found. Then I sat at the desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Wrote Bella's name at the top. If anything happens to me, she'll know where to look. She'll know the story. She won't be caught off guard the way I was. Because tonight, being told to leave my own living room, something inside me hardened into place. No more giving him room to humiliate me. No more letting him pretend I was a guest in my own life. I folded the paper, slipped it into an envelope, and tucked it into the fireproof box. Then I turned off the light and sat in the dark, listening to the house creak around me. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was a quiet, deliberate kind of planning. I wrote her name at the top of the page 3 times before I could start. Bella Rowan, Bella Rowan, Bella Rowan, my granddaughter, my only anchor left. The pen felt heavy, my fingers cramped, but the words came anyway, slow and steady, like water finding its way through stone. My dear Bella, if you're reading this, it means the time has come for you to know everything. Not the polite version we tell at family dinners, but the real one. The story of how a woman can give and give until she disappears, and how one day she wakes up and decides to stop. I paused, stared at the sentence. It looked harsh on paper, but true. Truth is always harsher than the stories we build around it. I went on. You were the only one who ever came without asking for something. You sat at my kitchen table and told me about books and boys and dreams you were half afraid to say out loud. You reminded me that love can be quiet and still be real. That's why I chose you. The kettle whistled. I poured the water, let the tea steep, came back to the letter. Your father once was a boy I loved, the way you can only love your firstborn. But somewhere along the line, that boy turned into a man who saw me as a bank, a maid, a safe. It's not your fault. It's not even entirely his. But I will not let that be your inheritance. I set down the pen, rubbed my aching knuckles. Outside, the street lamp flickered on. The kitchen felt smaller, like the walls were leaning in to read over my shoulder. I added one last paragraph. There is a folder in the fireproof box under my bed. Inside are the papers that matter. My will, the trust, the title to the cabin. When the time comes, take them to Miss Howland. She will explain everything. Don't let anyone pressure you. Don't let anyone tell you that you owe them what you've been given. This is yours because you loved without taking. That's all. I signed it simply, Grandma. Then I folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, sealed it with my thumb. On the front, in block letters, Bella, for when the time comes. I sat there a long time with the envelope in my hands. Part of me wanted to give it to her now, watch her open it, explain everything. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Some truths need timing. Instead, I opened the small, fireproof box, laid the envelope on top of the other documents, and closed the lid. The sound of the latch clicking shut felt like a heartbeat. When Graham came home late that night, I was still at the kitchen table. He smelled of alcohol and cologne. His eyes flicked to the box by my feet and back to my face. He didn't ask. But I saw the flicker of suspicion, like a man sniffing smoke before he sees fire. "You're still up?" he muttered. "I couldn't sleep," I said. He poured himself a drink and stood in the doorway, watching me like he used to watch stray cats from his bedroom window. Curious, a little cruel. "What are you writing?" he asked. "A letter? To who?" "Someone who deserves it." He smirked, but there was an edge under it. "You always were dramatic." I took a sip of my tea and didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, heavy and taut. Finally, he shrugged and went upstairs. I exhaled slowly. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from the knowledge that the next moves had to be careful. He was circling, testing the edges. He could sense something slipping out of his control, and he hated it. I took another sheet of paper and began a list. Bank accounts, contacts, passwords, instructions. Not for me, for Bella. A map out of the labyrinth I'd let myself into. I didn't feel like an old woman anymore. I felt like a soldier packing a bag before dawn. The night hummed quietly around me. Somewhere in the house, a pipe groaned. Upstairs, a door shut. Outside, a car passed. Then nothing. I looked at the letter again. The envelope seemed to glow in the dim light, small but solid, like a key to a door no one else could open. When the time came, Bella would know. And when Graham tried to take what wasn't his, there would be nothing left to burn. He found the letter by mistake. Or maybe he was looking. In that furtive, guilt-drenched way that cowards look for confirmation of what they already suspect. I came home from my morning walk and felt it instantly. The air in the house was off. Still, but disturbed, like someone had moved through it too quickly. The door to my room was ajar. The light was on. My desk chair was out, not how I'd left it. I went in. The fireproof box was in its place, but the lid sat crooked, not locked. And the envelope, the one addressed to Bella, was gone. I stood there a moment, not breathing. Then I turned, walked back down the hallway. He was in the kitchen, leaning on the counter, the envelope open beside him like a dead bird. He didn't look up when I entered, didn't speak. I waited. Finally, he said, "So that's what this is." I didn't answer. He picked up the letter and shook it slightly. "You rewrote everything, took my name out." "Yes," I said calmly, "after everything I've done for you." I laughed, a small, bitter sound. "What exactly have you done for me, Graham?" He flushed. "I gave you a place to live. In the house I paid for. I paid the bills. With my money." His jaw clenched. "You ungrateful—" "No," I interrupted. "That's not the word you're looking for. Try. Tired. Used up. Done." He stepped closer. I didn't move. "Why Bella?" he demanded. "She's a child. She doesn't know how to manage anything. She doesn't deserve—" "Don't finish that sentence," I said. "She's just a kid." "She's kind." He stopped. The word didn't fit in his mouth. "She's kind," I repeated. "She sits with me. She listens. She doesn't take what isn't offered. That's more than I can say for you." His voice rose. "I'm your son." I nodded. "Yes, and I was your mother, and I still am. But I will not die as your excuse." He stared at me like I'd slapped him. Then he picked up the envelope and waved it. You think this holds up in court? You think she'll get away with this? I'll contest it. You won't, I said, because the real documents aren't here. His face twisted. So what? This was just a decoy? A test? A warning. He slammed his hand on the table. You planned this all along. No, I said. I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. Silence settled between us like ash. He stared at me for a long time, something feral and lost flickering in his eyes. Then he picked up the envelope and tore it in two, right in front of me. The sound echoed like a crack in a frozen lake. You think this changes anything? He spat. She'll still need me. She's just a kid. She'll fold the second there's pressure. I stepped forward, calmly took the pieces from his hands, laid them gently on the table. She's stronger than you think, and you've just given her a reason to prove it. He turned and stormed out. I stood alone in the kitchen, the torn letter beside me, the kettle still warm on the stove. My heart beat fast, but not from fear, from clarity. Now he knew. The illusion was gone. He'd spent months walking through this house like a man waiting for an inheritance, but that house was a shell now. The real weight, the real legacy, had moved on without him. He thought burning the will would end the story, but all it did was start the next chapter. He didn't speak to me for 2 days. Not a word, not a sound. Just the thud of his boots on the stairs, the clatter of drawers, the occasional slamming of a door he'd been meaning to fix for years. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like a storm that hadn't decided where to strike yet. On the third evening, he broke. I was folding laundry on the couch, his shirts mostly. Old habit. He stood in the doorway with that stiff posture he used when pretending he hadn't been drinking. You know what this is going to do to me? He asked. I didn't look up. What you've done to yourself is already enough. His laugh was brittle. Oh, come on. Don't act like you're some victim. You lived off me too, remember? No, I said, calmly placing a towel in the basket. I paid for this house. I paid for your startup. I paid for every emergency you invented. You've lived off me. He stepped into the room. I was your son. That's what families do. I looked up then. No, Graham, that's what decent families do. This? I pointed gently to the space between us. This is something else. He shook his head, pacing now. So what? You're just going to give everything to Bella? Cut me out completely? After all these years? Yes, I said. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Not at first. Finally, you're punishing me. No, I replied. I'm remembering who I am. That stopped him. I stood. My knees hurt, but I stood tall. For years I let you treat me like furniture, I said. Useful, silent, unacknowledged. I gave you everything I had because I thought if I gave enough you'd change. You didn't. He tried to interrupt. I raised a hand. No more explanations, Graham. No more threats. No more guilt. I am not your safety net. I am not your hostage. His voice trembled, with anger, not regret. I'll go to court. You won't win. I'll tell people. You've already told people, I said, stepping forward. Every time you ignored me in public. Every time you introduced me as the old lady I take care of. Every time you made a joke about my senior moments while spending my pension behind my back. He blinked, fast, his face red with heat. You're ashamed of me, I said. That's the truth, isn't it? You didn't want the old woman who raised you showing up at your business dinners. You didn't want the nurse's daughter in your clean little version of success. That's not... It is, I cut him off. But you don't get to have it both ways. You don't get to erase me and collect the benefits. That arrangement is over. His hands balled into fists. So what now? You expect me to just walk away? No, I said. I expect you to watch. He tilted his head, confused. Watch as someone else, someone kinder, someone honest, carries the name forward. Watch as the person you dismissed becomes the one I chose. Watch your daughter become the legacy you never earned. The silence that followed was the deepest yet. No clatter, no slam, just stillness. He left that night. Took a duffel bag, a bottle, and nothing else. I watched from the porch as his taillights faded into the dark. And for the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a waiting room. It felt like a place I could breathe. She came the next afternoon, earlier than usual. Didn't smile when she walked in. Didn't take off her shoes. Just stood there in the hallway holding a brown paper bag with a jar of homemade jam inside. Plum, her favorite. She handed it to me wordlessly, her eyes scanning my face. You okay? She asked. No, I said. But I'm getting there. She followed me into the kitchen the same way she always did, but this time she didn't sit. Just hovered, unsure, like she'd stepped into someone else's house. I poured tea, pushed her mug across the table, waited. Finally, she said, He called me. Of course he did. What did he say? She shrugged, arms crossed. That you'd gone behind his back. That you were being manipulated. That you were leaving everything to me to spite him. I stirred my tea slowly. And what did you say? I said, Is that really what you think she's capable of? My chest tightened. Not from fear, not from pride. Something softer, older. She sat then, hands wrapped around the mug like it was cold. Is it true? She asked. I nodded. I don't understand. You will. I got up, went to my room, opened the fireproof box. Took out the documents, the copies, the new sealed envelope. When I returned, I laid them gently in front of her. Everything I have that still matters, I said, is in your name. She blinked, stunned. Why? I didn't answer with a speech. I told her the story. Not all at once. Not the sanitized version. The real one. I told her about the house I sold, the accounts I surrendered, the cafe that never opened. About the yelling. The way he took over the bills. The way I became invisible in my own home. The way I stopped recognizing the boy I raised. And then I told her about her. About the Thursdays. The quiet conversations. The kindness without motive. You were the only one who came for me, I said. Not for what I could give. Just for me. She didn't cry. She listened. And when I finished, she said the one thing I never expected. I'm sorry. That almost undid me. No, I whispered. Don't apologize for his choices. She shook her head. I'm not. I'm sorry it took me this long to see how bad it was. I thought you were just tired. I didn't know you were disappearing. That word, disappearing, caught in my throat. She reached out, placed her hand on mine. Her fingers warm, firm, real. I'll protect it, she said. Whatever you give me. Not just the money, the truth. I nodded. That's all I wanted. We sat for a long time after that. The documents unopened on the table. Her thumb brushing over the edge of the envelope like she was tracing something holy. You sure about this? She asked once. Yes. Even if it causes trouble? I smiled faintly. Trouble is already here. I'm just turning the lights on. She exhaled through her nose. He's not going to let this go. I know. I'll be ready, she said. And in that moment, I believed her. Not because she sounded brave, but because she sounded like someone who had nothing left to lose by telling the truth. Before she left, she hugged me. Not delicately, not politely. She wrapped her arms around me the way a drowning person hugs air. I stood there in the quiet after she was gone, the kitchen still full of her presence. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd given someone something that couldn't be taken. Not a check, not a house, not even a name, but the truth, clean and whole. He started calling again a week later. At first, voicemails, garbled, late-night ones, slurred around the edges. "Mom, we need to talk. I think you've been misled." Then, angrier. "You've got no idea how this looks. To people, to family." I didn't answer. Not out of spite, out of necessity. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said in quieter, more permanent ways. Next came the emails. Long, erratic messages filled with shifting tones. Apology, accusation, bargaining. One began with, "I'm sorry for how I spoke," and ended with, "But don't think Bella will know what to do with all that responsibility." Another said simply, "You're still my mother. That has to mean something." It does, I thought, sitting in the sun with my tea. It means I raised you. It doesn't mean I owe you. Then silence. For a while. Until Miss Howland called. "He tried to reach us," she said. "Twice. Came in person this morning. We asked him to leave." "Did he threaten anyone?" "No," she said. "But he was desperate." That word. It didn't frighten me. But it reminded me how far he'd already fallen. Not financially, but morally. There was no center left in him. Only appetite. "He said you've been manipulated," she added gently. "He says that when he runs out of other explanations." There was a pause on the line. "I just want you to be aware. He may try again." "I'm ready," I said. And I was. But being ready doesn't mean it doesn't sting. That night, I sat in the living room alone, the TV on low, not really watching. I thought about all the times he used to call me in desperation. From college, from broken apartments, from parking lots with dead batteries. And I always picked up, always sent money, always found a way. I thought, this is the first time I've ever let him fall all the way, and it felt not good, but necessary. A few days later, he showed up at the house. I saw his car from the window and didn't open the door. He knocked. Once, twice. Then, "Mom, please." I stayed seated. "I know you're in there. Just let me talk to you, that's all." Silence. "I'm trying," he said. His voice cracked on that word. "I'm trying to make it right." The porch creaked under his weight. "I lost a lot," he said, quieter now. "More than you know." I closed my eyes. "You didn't lose it," I wanted to say. "You used it up." Finally, I heard his footsteps retreat, the engine start. Then nothing. Later that night, he sent one more message. "I read what you wrote to Bella. She showed me. You think I'm a monster. I'm not. I just needed help. And now you've turned her against me, too." I didn't respond. I didn't even finish reading. I turned off the phone and sat there in the dark, the quiet stretching out like a clean sheet. What Graham hadn't yet understood, what maybe he never would, was that this wasn't about punishment. It was about closure, about drawing a line not in anger, but in finality, about not being the woman who kept saving someone who never learned how to stand. He thought he could appeal to guilt, but guilt had already had its time, and its time was over. The silence didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like peace. I woke earlier, without dread. The ache in my chest, the one that had sat there for years like a rock under the ribs, began to lift, not because things were easier, but because they were clearer. There is a difference, I've learned, between quiet and absence, between loneliness and solitude. I wasn't lonely. I was alone. Finally, truly. And in that space, something inside me began to breathe again. Bella started visiting more. Not every day, but often. She didn't hover. She didn't ask questions. She helped carry groceries, made jokes while we shelled peas, read to me from the college brochures she'd been too afraid to bring up before. One afternoon, she brought a small notebook and laid it on the table. "I made a list," she said, "of everything I need to understand before I have to take over things." I smiled, opened it. The first entry read, "How to talk to the bank like you belong there." I touched her hand. "You already do," I said. Graham didn't come back. Not physically. Not even to the front porch. But I felt his presence sometimes. In the way neighbors looked at me a little longer, in the occasional sideways glance at the market, in the silence that follows a name people no longer know how to say without discomfort. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. Let them believe whatever version they needed. I had my own. One day, I walked out to the garden. It was late April. The first tulips had cracked through the soil Harold planted all those years ago. He always said they were stubborn. "Like you," he used to grin. I stood there for a long time, hands in my coat pockets, watching the light shift across the petals. The house felt behind me, not around me. That's when I knew. It was time to go. Not run, not escape. Just leave before the leaving was forced, before someone else decided I was too fragile, too frail, too much. That evening, I called Miss Howland. "I'm thinking of moving," I said. There was a pause on her end. "To the cabin?" "Yes." Another pause. Softer. "Do you want help organizing the transition?" "No," I said. "I've started. I just wanted you to know, in case things come up." We handled a few remaining items. Small details, address changes, mail forwarding. Nothing urgent, nothing dramatic. I didn't need a moving truck. I didn't own much anymore. I'd spent the last year quietly giving things away. To Bella, to the neighbor's boy who always helped with the trash, to the hospice resale shop that picked up twice a month. I kept one trunk, one box of papers, 2 suitcases, and the old kettle. And the key to the cabin. It was still tucked in the small velvet pouch Harold gave me on our 15th anniversary. The one that used to hold earrings I no longer wore. I'd kept it in the back of my drawer, behind the thread and thimbles. That key had waited long enough. I told Bella on a Thursday. We were making tea. She was slicing ginger, something she'd taught me, and I said it as simply as anything else. "I'm going back to the cabin." She paused, the knife in her hand. "For how long?" "Until." She looked at me, long and serious. "Is it safe?" "Yes." "Will you be okay alone?" "I won't be alone." She nodded, and then after a moment, "Can I visit?" I smiled. Not every Thursday, but yes. She didn't argue. She didn't offer to pack for me or talk me out of it. She simply asked what I needed. "Just carry the trunk to the car," I said. And that Sunday, she did. I didn't cry when we pulled away from the house. I didn't look back. I'd already left that place in every way that mattered. The walls still held echoes of things I couldn't change. But the car, the road, that was mine now. As we turned off the highway and onto the dirt path, the trees thickened around us. The sky lowered. The air cooled. And when we reached the cabin, standing quiet among the moss and pine, I felt something settle in my bones. Not sadness, not nostalgia. Permission. Permission to finish the story on my own terms. The cabin hadn't changed much. The steps still groaned. The door still stuck. The windows still fought back when opened too far. But it held warmth. Not just from the sun that spilled through the trees, but from memory. The kind that doesn't ache anymore, just pulses quietly beneath the floorboards. I arrived on a Sunday. Bella helped carry the trunk and the box of papers. She asked where I wanted things and didn't question the old quilts or the chipped lamp or the dusty jar labeled safety pins, plus matches. She made the bed while I unpacked the kitchen. Neither of us talked much. The silence between us had grown comfortable, like wool pulled over cold hands. Before she left, she stood at the door for a while, looking out at the trees. "You sure you'll be okay out here alone?" she asked again. I touched her arm. "I've never been more sure of anything." She nodded and pulled me into a hug. I held her longer than I meant to. After she drove off, I sat on the porch and listened. Not for cars, not for voices, just for the sound of space. The birds. The creak of the trees. The ticking inside my body that I'd drowned out for years under someone else's noise. I made tea, opened the windows, laid the kettle on the stove like setting down an old friend. No TV, no messages, no secondhand tension. Just me, and the house, and the quiet. I fell into rhythm quickly. Up at 6, tea at 7. Small walks when the weather allowed, a list of simple tasks. Fix the hinge, air out the attic, sweep the back steps. My hands moved slower than they used to, but with more purpose. There is something holy in washing a mug that no one else will touch. I wrote letters, some to Bella, some I never sent. I wrote for myself, mostly, to remember that I still had a voice, that I could still shape something out of nothing, words on paper, a clean window, a warm plate, and slowly, the fear began to drain. Not fear of Graham. That had passed. But the deeper fear, that I would only ever exist in relation to others. That I'd spend my last years being someone's burden or someone's bitter secret or someone's excuse. Here, I was none of those things. I was just a woman with a past, a kettle, and a plan. Some mornings, I sat on the back step and watched the fog roll in through the trees. Other days, I read books I never finished. I made soup from scratch. I mended a hole in my cardigan. I picked up the old wind chime from under the porch and hung it again. It sang like it remembered me. One afternoon, I found a letter from Bella slipped under the front door. She must have come while I was out walking. It read, "The house feels different without you, lighter somehow." I started painting the walls. He called again. I didn't answer. I don't think I'm afraid of him anymore. P.S. I'm applying to that out-of-state program. The one I thought was too expensive. Just wanted you to know. You made me feel like I could. I read it 3 times. Then folded it, tucked it into the inside pocket of my cardigan, and wore it for the rest of the day. The past still visited me, but not like before. It didn't crash through the windows anymore. It knocked politely. It whispered instead of shouted. Sometimes I let it in. Sometimes I told it to wait. That's the difference, I think, between getting older and finally being old. You stop asking for permission. You stop pretending that silence means peace. And you realize, if you're lucky, that the last chapters aren't about endings. They're about return to the version of you that wasn't built around survival, to the woman you were before someone else told you who to be. The last time Graham tried to reach me, he sent a letter. No return address. Just my name in slanted handwriting I'd stopped recognizing as his years ago. Inside, a folded page and a photo. Him as a child, standing by the swing set. Harold built, one sock inside out, his smile wide, his hand holding mine. On the page, 3 sentences. I don't know what I became. I'm sorry I didn't stop sooner. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. There was no threat in it, no bargaining. Just the faint outline of a man who'd finally met himself in the mirror and didn't like what he saw. I didn't write back, not out of bitterness, but because some answers are already spoken in silence. By then, Bella had already been accepted. Out of state. Partial scholarship. The rest covered. By the trust. By the savings he tried to erase. By me. She called me when she got the news. Screamed into the phone, half laughing, half crying. Said she was going to study literature, then maybe law, then maybe everything at once. You made this real, she said. No, I told her. You did. I just made sure no one took it from you. The day she left, she came to the cabin. Drove herself. Her first long solo drive. She brought groceries and new socks and a small tin of her favorite tea for me. I gave her a letter and a necklace that had once belonged to my mother. You sure? She asked. I'm not keeping things anymore, I said. I'm giving them. She held me on the porch, longer than usual. I could feel her heartbeat in her shoulder. Steady. Ready. After she left, I sat in the quiet. No sadness, no ache. Just stillness. I wasn't waiting for anything now. I'd lived through the part people don't talk about. The unraveling of what you thought family meant. The slow, painful shift from mother to obstacle. From thank you to what else. And I had chosen not to vanish. I had made one last choice. Not out of rage, but out of remembrance. Of who I was before I was flattened by someone else's needs. I thought often about other women. Women sitting in houses that once felt safe, now just rooms of obligation. Women cleaning counters while someone else lies about them to neighbors. Women who know they're being used, but feel too tired to fight. If you're one of them, hear me now. You are not too late. You are not too small. You are not wrong for wanting peace. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't have to wait until it gets worse to save yourself. I didn't light any fires. I didn't raise my voice. I just quietly made sure the matches were mine. And when the time came, I left the ashes where they belonged. In his hands, not mine. If this story spoke to you, share it. Not for me. For the women who think no one sees them, leave a comment. Tag someone. Let it echo. We don't disappear. We rise quietly, and we carry the truth with us.